Before we descend into this story, let it be said clearly, viewer discretion is advised. What follows is not a news report, not a documentary, not a record of verifiable events, but a stylized tale told for entertainment, a dramatized imagining of a moment that never unfolded quite this way. Think of it as a stage play performed under the hot lights of daytime television, where reality blurs into theater and emotions grow larger than life. What, after all, becomes of a man who has walked through fire? A man shaped in the furnace of addiction, tempered by prison walls, and remade in the crucible of self-redemption. Jelly Roll, Jason DeFord, had risen from that inferno, from a cell to a studio, from a struggle to a stadium, from a whisper of doubt to a roar of applause. He had become to millions a titan of modern country music, his voice thick with gravel, his presence marked with inked stories of past battles and hard-earned victories. And yet, even a titan can be thrust into a new arena, one where the blades are words, and the battleground is a polished wooden table beneath studio lights. The scene opens on the set of The View, a set so familiar to millions yet strangely foreign to the man now stepping onto the stage. Jelly Roll had entered believing the platform would be a vessel for his story, a chance to speak of his odyssey from rock bottom to redemption, of the music that carried him, of the people he fought to uplift. It was supposed to be a moment of celebration, reflection, and triumph, but in this dramatic retelling, fate had chosen a different script. Across from him sat Joy Behar, reimagined here, not as the seasoned comedian and television host she is, but as a fictionalized antagonist crafted for narrative tension. In this theatrical version, she was armed not with curiosity, but with a sharpened arsenal of accusations, each one poised like a blade waiting to test the resolve of the man before her. She was the storm, he the steady mountain. Or so he hoped. This was no interview, not in this imagined universe. This was a trial by daylight, a confrontation painted in dramatic brushstrokes, more Shakespeare than morning talk show. And so, like an epic hero unknowingly marching into a test of his own spirit, Jelly Roll took his seat. The cameras rolled, the audience leaned forward, and somewhere inside him, the quiet hum of anticipation mingled with the instinctive bracing before a coming blow. Before the curtain rises, the narrator's voice calls out, "Subscribe to this chronicle. Prepare your voice, for when the final act falls, you will have opinions that demand release." The audience at home is drawn into the unfolding spectacle, sensing that something volatile, something unforgettable, is taking form in the space between the host's poised expression and Jelly Roll's earnest smile. The air on that Tuesday morning was thick, almost physical, as though the room itself recognized the weight of the forthcoming exchange. The studio lights burned with the intensity of a summer noon, washing the set in a glare that made every breath sharper, every silence louder. Jelly Roll adjusted the collar of his black button-down shirt, the fabric stretching across shoulders built by struggle and years of carrying weight heavier than chains. He lowered himself into the legendary guest chair, a throne and a witness box all at once in this dramatized version of events. The audience, a sea of faces glowing with excitement, murmured with anticipation. Many were fans, people who had followed his astonishing rise. They knew the stories that lived under his tattoos, the ghosts he had long ago confronted, the nights he had fought through, the mornings he earned. They had seen him climb from obscurity to a spot at the top of the country charts, defying every odd stacked against him. Whoopi Goldberg, in her signature calm presence, had just concluded her opening remarks. The current of energy that rippled through the room was warm, welcoming, deceivingly peaceful. It was the eye of a storm, no, one yet realized they were standing inside. Behind the stage persona, behind the myth the world had crafted around him, stood Jason DeFord, the man who had waited weeks for this appearance. To him, this was not merely press, it was emission, a chance to shine light where darkness had once swallowed him whole. He hoped to speak of his new album, yes, but also of his ongoing crusade for justice reform, of the broken systems he wanted to mend, and of the countless souls still wrestling with the same demons he had once faced and conquered. "Our next guest has had quite the journey," Whoopi began, her voice rising like a warm breeze before the storm. "From spending time behind bars to topping the country charts. Please welcome Jelly Roll." The room exploded. Applause crashed like a wave against the shore of the moment. Jelly Roll stepped forward, hand raised, smile wide, real, unfiltered, unforced. It was the kind of smile built not from media training, but from gratitude carved into the bones. "Thank you so much for having me," he said, his voice carrying that familiar southern depth, the resonance of a man whose life had given him more stories than most novels. The tone rolled through the studio like a river, slow, powerful, steady. "I've been watching this show for years," he continued, "so this is pretty surreal for me." And in that instant, with his humility laid bare before the cameras, the stage lights, and the millions watching from their living rooms, the prologue ended. The first act stood ready to begin. What comes next in this fictional retelling? The clash, the questions, the test of patience and pride? Is the unfolding of a story as dramatic as any Greek tragedy, as combustible as any showdown ever aired before a daytime audience? The moment felt as though the air itself had tightened, as if the studio's walls were holding their breath. His voice, steady and unwavering, cut through the tension like a blade honed by years of hardship. "You are precisely the kind of person who keeps families fractured and communities broken," he declared, each syllable delivered with the calm certainty of someone who had long grown weary of being misunderstood. "You are the problem here, not I." There was no anger in his tone, only a chilling clarity, and with that final pronouncement he turned away from her, the gesture so complete and deliberate that it felt like a door closing forever. It was not simply the end of a conversation, it was the end of any claim she might have had on being heard by him. The dismissal was total, an erasure. He pivoted toward Whoopi, the host who had tried to hold the chaotic exchange together. His expression softened just enough to acknowledge that she, at least, had not come into this encounter with the intent to wound. "Thank you for inviting me to your show," he said, his voice returning to a low, grounded register. "I regret that it devolved into this conflict, but I will not apologize for defending myself from an attack armed with nothing but malice and prejudice." The camera, as if compelled by some instinct for drama, captured Joyce's face, one last lingering shot before the moment slipped into memory. Shock had drained the color from her cheeks. The confidence she had worn like armor at the start of the interview was gone, replaced by something fragile and newly awakened. Her expression revealed the dawning realization that she had gravely misjudged the battlefield she thought she commanded. She looked like someone who had just recognized the catastrophic scale of her own miscalculation. This was no mere disagreement, no heated television debate meant to stir ratings. She now understood, too late, that she had stormed a fortress fortified not by arrogance, but by a lifetime of wounds, triumphs, mistakes, and hard-won wisdom. She had crossed into territory she was not prepared to navigate. "Wait," she called out suddenly, her voice thin and uncertain. It was not the sharp, confident tone she had used earlier. It was the voice of someone who wanted to rewind time, who wished desperately to repair the damage but had no idea how. But Jelly Roll did not slow his step. He did not grant her even the briefest backward glance. "Our business is concluded," he said over his shoulder, the words delivered with the gravity of a final judgment. Each syllable struck the studio like a gavel. "I came here to speak of redemption and hope, and you twisted it into an assault. The fault for that is yours, not mine." He walked off the stage, leaving behind a crackling silence. For a few seconds no one moved. It felt as though the very air had been struck by lightning. The other hosts sat rigid, their eyes wide, their posture frozen. They struggled to comprehend the explosion they had witnessed, something far beyond the scope of anything they had expected when the taping began. The set, normally buzzing with conversation and overlapping voices, was transformed into a tableau of stunned disbelief. And at the center of it all sat Joyce, isolated, diminished, her earlier bravado now stripped away entirely. She looked smaller somehow, as though the confrontation had drained her of all pretense. She had entered this dialogue like a general marching confidently into battle. She now sat like one who had discovered, too late, that her strategies were flawed, her assumptions misguided, and her enemy someone she never truly understood. What had begun as a standard interview, a routine segment meant to promote a message of healing, had evolved into something far more significant. It had become a clash of philosophies, a collision between two visions of humanity. On one side stood skepticism, rigid and suspicious, convinced that people rarely change, that past failures define the limits of a person's worth. On the other stood the belief that redemption is possible, that a human being is more than the worst thing they have ever done, and that grace is not a weakness but a form of strength. The confrontation was not just personal, it was symbolic. It represented a broader struggle happening everywhere, in communities, in families, in public discourse, a struggle between those who demand perfection before offering forgiveness, and those who understand that broken people can still rise and rebuild. And in the end, it was impossible for anyone in that studio to deny who had emerged the victor. The room itself seemed to acknowledge it, as though the truth were hanging in the air, impossible to ignore. He had not raised his voice, he had not hurled insults, he had simply stood firm in his dignity, in his belief in second chances, and in his refusal to be shamed for the life he had survived. So now the question turns to you, the observer of this extraordinary confrontation. What is your verdict? Do you believe that people truly deserve a second chance, real, meaningful redemption that acknowledges both past failures and future potential? Was Joyce's skepticism a reasonable defense, born of caution and concern? Or did it reveal a fatal flaw, a refusal to see the humanity in someone who has fought to rise above their mistakes? Leave your own intelligence report in the comments below, and if you want more chronicles that challenge your assumptions and force you to rethink everything you thought you knew, be sure to subscribe. The conversation is far from over. He turned slowly, deliberately, until his eyes locked on Whoopi. He addressed her not with disrespect, not with heat or fury, but with something far more unsettling, an unyielding, immovable resolve. His voice, when it came, was steady enough to be mistaken for calm, yet it carried the unmistakable rumble of something dangerous simmering beneath the surface. "I appreciate your intention," he said, each syllable placed like a stone, "but this must be heard." A hush rippled across the studio. The lights overhead hummed gently, unaware of the human storm brewing below them. He continued, "I came to this table in good faith," he said, gesturing to the curved desk, the mugs, the cards, the polished surface that suddenly felt like the cold altar of a courtroom. "I came to speak of music, of redemption, of the possibility of hope in a world that often forgets it exists. I came believing I would be met with conversation." He paused, a shift, a tightening. Instead, he said softly, "I walked into a prepared ambush." The crowd reacted collectively, a gasp, a shuffle, a prickling tension that lifted every hair in the room. His gaze never wavered. "The verdict on my character," he went on, "was decided before the trial even began." He pivoted then, turning back toward Joy, but this time something in him changed. His voice dropped in volume, but the intensity, the coiled force, sharpened until it felt like a blade drawn across glass. "Do you know the greatest sadness in this entire room?" he asked her, not accusingly, but with a haunting kind of sorrow. "It is the opportunity you squandered today." The studio seemed to shrink, as though the walls leaned in to hear. "You could have asked about the programs I champion," he said. "About the children I mentor, about the cruel work being done to salvage lives from the wreckage I once contributed to." A flicker of pain crossed his face, too raw to be theatrical, but instead, he whispered, "You chose to be a tormentor." Joy stiffened, indignation flaring in her eyes. "I am not a tormentor," she protested, though her voice trembled just slightly. "For what?" he exploded, not shouting, but detonating, his composure fractured like a glass struck by a hammer, shards of emotion scattering everywhere. "For getting clean, for rebuilding a shattered life, for trying every single day to steer others away from the cliffs I once threw myself from. Tell me, what is my crime in this court you've built?" The air thickened. Heavy, electric, alive. The cameras, like mechanical predators, panned across the audience, capturing wide eyes, parted lips, hands pressed against stunned faces. People didn't dare breathe. High in the control room, the producers whispered frantically, some horrified, some entranced, unsure whether they were witnessing a broadcast disaster or the kind of once seen, a generation television moment that would be replayed for decades. "You're accountable," Joy finally shot back, Her voice regained its edge as she hurled what she must have believed was her final, fatal blow. You profit from a tale of redemption while your victims still suffer. The word hit him like a physical strike. Profiting, his lips parted, the word falling out in a breath that sounded like it hurt. Profit, his voice cracked, the fracture so genuine, and it silenced even the shifting of chairs. You think this is profit? You think this is ease or comfort or glory? He leaned forward, closing the distance between them until his shadow spilled across her notes. His face was inches from hers, and the rawness in his eyes stripped the room of all remaining illusions. Every dollar I make, he said, is a debt I will spend the rest of my life repaying. Every stage I stand on is a reminder of the ghosts that follow me. Do you think I am ignorant of the families broken by the poison I once peddled? Do you think a record deal buys me peace? His voice deepened, steadied. I give away more money to recovery programs than most people will hold in their hands in a decade. I walk through prisons, not as a celebrity, but as someone speaking to boys who carry versions of my own ghost in their eyes. I use this microphone, this platform, this second chance to tell them that change is possible, that they are not doomed. Joy tried to interrupt, her mouth opened, a counter-argument forming, but his conviction washed over her words like a wave swallowing a spark. But that, he said, is not the story you want to tell, is it? You decided my role long ago. You cast me as the villain, and no mountain of evidence would ever sway your verdict. Joy scoffed. Evidence, a few charitable checks, a handful of prison visits. Do you really believe that a race is everything you did? The question struck like lightning. The audience jolted. Even the cameras seemed to freeze. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he pulled back. He straightened to his full height, the tremor in his hands settling. The fire in his eyes cooled into something deeper, something that felt like an ancient sorrow. No, he said quietly. Nothing can erase what I did. Nothing can bring back the lives lost because of my choices. Nothing can repair the families I helped shatter. Nothing can rebuild the communities I hurt. His voice, soft as it was, resonated through the silent room like a bell tolling in a vast cathedral. But that burden, he continued, is mine, every single day. It is not something I escape. It is something I carry. He looked at them all, the hosts, the audience, the cameras, and some unseen judge beyond them. You ask whether I deserve forgiveness, he said, whether I deserve redemption, whether a man with my past should be allowed to walk forward at all. He closed his eyes for a long, trembling moment. I do not know. He opened them again, and they glistened, not with self-pity, but with truth. That judgment does not belong to me, but I do know this. I will spend every remaining day of my life trying to be worthy of forgiveness I may never receive. Joy's mouth opened again, one last reflex, but he raised his hand softly, a gesture not of dominance, but of finality. You wish to judge me, he said. Then do so. Judge me by my actions from this day forward. Judge me by the lives I try to save, by the youth I keep from the path I once walked, by the families I help make whole. And when he finished, the room was so quiet it felt like the world itself had paused to listen. Do not judge me for the man I was. Judge me for the man I am becoming. The moment those words leave his lips, the world seems to stop. The air in the studio, once buzzing with casual audience whispers and the hum of live broadcast energy, collapses into a stunned, suffocating stillness. Every face in the room turns toward him, the guest who was expected to play the role of the repentant entertainer. The man whose troubled past was supposed to be a tool for daytime television drama. Instead, he has seized the narrative, flipped the script, and shattered the illusion that he was here to be politely shamed. Even Joy, the celebrated host whose confidence rarely wavers, appears momentarily stripped of her armor. Her eyebrows lift just slightly, but the high-definition camera doesn't miss anything. A single flicker crosses her expression, not irritation, not smugness, but something dangerously close to shame. It is gone in less than a heartbeat, but the damage is done. Millions will replay that frame, freeze it, analyze it, breathe life into it. He stands his ground, shoulders square, voice unshaken. You came into this arena today. He continues, his tone resonant and grounded, believing you would unmask a fraud, a performer pretending to be reformed. But the only thing you have revealed is your own inability to believe that a human being can rise above who they once were. His words are not venomous. They are steady, brutal in their truth. He takes a slow breath, adjusts his shirt not out of irritation, but to collect himself. This is not a meltdown. This is not a celebrity lashing out under pressure. This is a man reclaiming his dignity. For anyone watching right now. He says, turning fully toward the camera lens, turning toward the millions behind it. For anyone drowning in their mistakes, who wakes every morning afraid their history has already decided their destiny. For anyone told by voices like hers that your darkest hour is the only chapter you'll ever be remembered for. He gestures toward Joy, but his eyes remain locked with the audience. I need you to hear me. You can change. The declaration rings like a hammer strike in the silent studio. The path is cruel. You will bleed. You will fall more times than you can count. And there will always be people determined to drag you backwards because your climb threatens the comfort of their judgment. His voice softens, but the conviction only sharpens. But change is possible. Redemption is real. And no one has the right to tell you otherwise. Joy scrambles for control, tossing out a last-ditch attempt to reframe the conversation. Her voice is thin compared to his. I believe you're being excessively dramatic. He doesn't let her finish. No, he says, and the word slams down like a gavel. What I am being is honest. A hush rolls through the audience like a cold wind. You ambushed me today, he continues. You questioned my character, my motives, my right to speak about my own recovery. You tried to turn my life, my grief, into a spectacle for the sake of ratings. Joy shifts uncomfortably, but he doesn't relent. And when I defended myself, when I showed you what accountability actually sounds like, your response was to call me dramatic. He shakes his head slowly, disappointment etched across his features. Do you know what the real drama is, Joy? She is silent. You, he says, lifting a hand toward her but keeping a respectful distance, are exactly the type of person who makes seeking help a harder war to wage. You trivialize struggle. You mock redemption. You reinforce the lie that people like me, the broken, the addicted, the formerly lost, deserve every ounce of suffering we get. He pauses. The gravity of his words sinks deep. You are the problem here, not me. Without waiting for her reply, he turns not to flee, but to rise above. He offers a respectful nod to Whoopi, who has been silently witnessing the confrontation unfold like a train wreck she desperately wished she could stop. Thank you for inviting me, he says to her gently. I regret that the conversation became hostile, but I will never apologize for refusing to be dismantled for someone else's entertainment. Whoopi looks at him with something warm behind her eyes, not sympathy, but admiration. She gives a small, almost imperceptible nod. He steps toward the edge of the stage. The cameras follow him like loyal shadows. Behind him, Joy finally manages to speak. Wait, her voice is thin, unsteady. There is no authority in it now, only fear that she has gone too far. He does not turn around. Our business is concluded. He says, each word crisp, carved from certainty. I came here to speak of redemption and hope. You twisted it into an attack. That blame rests with you and only you. The silence that follows is electric. He takes those final steps, crossing the lit boundary of the set. And in that moment, it becomes clear that this is not a retreat, it is a victory march. The other hosts sit frozen. Some stare at Joy with disbelief, others with quiet judgment. Nobody rushes to defend her. Nobody dares to speak. They are spectators to the consequences of cruelty. Joy, once a towering presence behind the desk, seems shrunken now. Small beneath the weight of what she unleashed. She looks like a commander who marched boldly into battle, only to realize too late that the man she tried to conquer was not a villain, but a warrior forged in fire. The studio, the cameras, the audience all bear witness. What began as another predictable daytime interview has transformed into a televised reckoning. A moment people will replay not for scandal, but for strength. A declaration that redemption is not performative, it is lived. As he disappears behind the curtains, the lingering echo of his message remains. A person's past may shape them, but it does not own them. Not anymore.